Good evening and welcome to the Monday Agenda. The Monday Agenda today is delighted to eat every day. Do we know what we eat? Do we know how it's prepared? Now we have an expert to now bring all that into picture so that at the end of the day we may have that clarity of how we prepare our foods, but from the farm level. Dr. Hilbeck, very welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Now, my viewers would be very keen, first and foremost, to understand a little bit of your background and then in relation to what GMOs are.
Okay, so I'm by training an agroecologist, but I have been working in the last 30 years of my research on so-called biosafety issues. That means I have tried with my research group and my colleagues to understand what the ecological consequences would be if you grew or grow GMOs in agriculture in Europe, that is mainly, okay? So we've conducted research, we have developed risk assessment schemes, we have tried to feed those results and our concepts into the international debate, into the international policy making, and with the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. That's an international regulation that we are submitting our proposals to, and we inform the policymakers at the EU level and at the national level. So I've been engaged in these debates at many different fora and also with farmers and civil societies.
Okay. And so what brings you now into Tanzania?
Well, into Tanzania actually brings me an agroecology project together with a civil society, or actually we're doing this with a number of civil societies, a European civil society, SwissAid, and local civil society, Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania, for example, and Tabio we're working with, and we're working with the Sokoine University of Agriculture and have students there who work in the project. We have different stations in the country, and I go and visit the farmers that are involved in this project and the students that are involved in the project.
Okay, so what is this GMO?
So it's interesting that, you know, we're now talking about agroecology as a model of how to do agriculture, and GMOs, which has been a proposal, a techno proposal for agriculture. So when I started in this field 30 years ago, there was no agroecology debated in context with GMOs. And still today, these fields remain largely separated, certainly on the side of the technology providers, of the GMO providers. They wouldn't necessarily discuss agroecology, okay? So this is new. This is, and I consider that a bit of, I consider that progress, you know, that we finally are starting to contextualize technologies in production systems and not discuss technologies without context of in what system do you actually want to use it.
Okay.
So here now I am for joining a conference that I think we will be speaking about later on, and visiting the agroecology project in Tanzania, because I've done both in my past. I've been studying, researching the risks and safety issues of GMOs, and I have been studying and trying to understand how we can produce food in a better and smarter way than we do today, where we rely largely on chemicals, which have a lot of negative side effects.
So my viewer is currently watching and they're wondering, is GMO bad? Is GMO bringing any impact to us?
Okay, well, GMOs have been designed to have an impact, clearly, okay? But the argument is about what outweighs the other, okay? So, and it's exactly that kind of question that I'm hoping we're moving away from, just looking at GMOs, are they good or bad? But the real question is, are GMOs for a particular production system good or bad? In what context are you discussing it? Okay. So GMOs have been developed in support or by the chemical industry, let's put it this way, okay? So that's where they come from. Today's varieties, when cultivars we're growing, have been produced by what used to be chemical companies like Monsanto, Syngenta, and what today became Bayer and Dow Chemical, or whatever they're called today. Mm-hmm. They started to produce GMOs because they were moving from chemicals into the seed sector. Mm-hmm. And were capturing a production model, or were designing packages of platforms for the pesticides and the seeds that go with it, okay, for the industrial model. Okay. That's clear. Chemicals have been designed to implement an industrial model of agriculture that relies heavily on chemical fertilizers or on chemical pesticides. That's where it comes from, okay? So we're now moving towards understanding, or after the, doing this now for 50 years, half a century or so, we're seeing the negative sides of this chemical-based industrial model of agriculture. And people, certainly in Europe, are getting kind of fed up with that. So we want to have a agricultural production model and a connected food system that goes along with the production model that gets rid of the chemicals, mm-hmm, and respects natural processes better, so that we can heal our ecosystems that have suffered tremendously under this chemical model for decades now. Mm-hmm. And that's where agroecology comes in.
Tanzania, amongst many African countries, many third world countries which are evolving economies, gearing towards embracing industrialization. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure my viewers who are watching will be like, okay, so should we not industrialize?
Well, I think what you need to do is you need to define what you mean with industrialization. So there's different paths you can take, okay? Absolutely. I have a clear opinion when it comes to what has been the standard conventional industrial model for agriculture and food production. And all you have to do is look to our, to countries in the North, or in the US or in Europe, mm-hmm, what this model did. So it did provide food, yeah, but it wasn't necessarily the best food for you. Okay. Because the food is contaminated with chemicals. The food is not necessarily rich in nutrients anymore, because, mm-hmm, the cultivars have been bred to an extent where it serves the needs of the industry, not necessarily the needs of your body. Okay. And the environment is suffering tremendously. We've lost 80% of our insect diversity in Europe, 80%. Mm-hmm. So the insects are gone, and many of them are gone for good. And they have delivered or deliver very, very important services to the environment that we have to substitute then with more and more chemicals, mm, that are causing more and more damage. So it's really a treadmill we're on. Mm-hmm. And we're reaching the end of that treadmill. I mean, it's only 20% more insects, and then they're gone. And that would be the end of our food production, because we rely on insects, mm, to pollinate our crops, etc. It's already noticeable that they're missing, So we really have to get off of that chemical treadmill, mm-hmm, quite fast, actually. And that's where the alternative models come in, like agroecology. In Europe, we have usually the very formalized form, the codified form called organics, which goes along with a very rigorous certification scheme. That's not for every country, certainly not for developing countries, a good model. So it's clear that we have to come up with tailored models for the countries and the locations. There's not one uniform recipe like the industrial model was. It's like a uniform recipe, you know, grow high-yielding varieties of standard uniform quality, grow large monocultures, use the same chemicals, use the same fertilizer, etc. So it was a very uniform model implemented everywhere the same, which is very unnatural. Nature is different everywhere. So that causes, of course, a lot of problems. You know.
I'm attempting to weigh between the industrial model, whereby we need raw materials for our industries to sustain the industrialization model. We need raw materials, and we just don't need a certain amount, but we need volumes and volumes. And this is one of the arguments where the companies, the likes of Monsanto and Syngenta, are arguing that, yes, let's pump so that we have more supply into our industries. And I'm looking onto the contribution of industries, for instance, to GDP vis-a-vis individual farmers. Tanzania, Africa, developing world is characterized by smallholder farmers. So I'm looking onto expedited development vis-a-vis actual development by using technology such as GMO. What's your take on that?
Well, many issues. So you've described it correctly. Tanzania is characterized by more than 80% being smallholder farmers who are actually producing food for their families, but also for you and the city folks living and needing food. So the industrialized model, as you also correctly pointed out, is producing raw materials, commodities. The only very few of those raw materials actually go into food directly. Most of it goes into feeding animals, and it's feeding animals that are kept in an industrial form, closed away in mass factory style containments that cannot feed themselves anymore. Okay, so very unnatural, not very animal just forms of keeping foods, livestock for food. So that's where most of the calories that are produced by these commodity crops go first into feeding industrial farm factories of livestock. And then that ends up on a plate for humans. And a significant portion of those commodities also go in non-food uses, industrial food uses, the whole bioenergy sector, ethanol, etc., industrial uses of these commodities. That's a significant portion where it goes. So it's actually not feeding necessarily humans. It's primarily feeding engines, stomachs of animals that then feed maybe humans, and that is highly unsustainable. That's not a model that it serves some really well, but many it doesn't serve at all.
Why should a policymaker, why should governments be concerned?
I would hope or think that governments have an interest in feeding everybody, and have an interest in feeding everybody in an equitable manner with healthy food in a way that they don't have to be concerned that the farmers are poisoning themselves, because that's another issue you see in particular in developing countries with smallholder farmers that tend to be poor. If you pass toxic chemicals to them for use, you hardly ever pass the necessary protective gear along with it, nor the training you must have in order to handle these products safely. So you see a lot of farmers poisoning themselves, either acutely, that you see within a short period of time, or chronically, which only will manifest itself for years to come in very dubious, very strange diseases, cancers, etc., that you then don't know where it really comes from and how to cure that and what to do about it. So there's a lot that goes along with using that chemical model of agriculture that I would think policymakers want to make sure isn't happening. So, and have an interest in keeping food poison-free and not poison the farmers.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe there are lessons that we can draw from, you've mentioned Europe, whereby now it's like you've gone back to the drawing board to as far as all this application and usage of GMOs, and now you want, I don't know what stages of agroecology you are already in. Before now, Tanzania embraces all this development, all this, although we will go back into innovation and science and technology and all that. What lessons can Tanzania draw to as far as GMOs are concerned?
Okay, GMOs had a hard time in Europe. They were never really embraced in Europe. Right from the get-go, the European population we're very diverse, you know, from Norway to Italy, from Portugal to Greece, so UK, France, Germany. So there's a lot of countries that are very different from each other. But that was one of the themes that unified or was almost across board all populations and segments. People were highly critical of it. So it wasn't a success. It wasn't embraced in Europe to this day. There's only Spain that grows 120,000 hectares, which is not a lot, of one product that has been permitted for cultivation in Europe, and they use it exclusively to feed their animals with it. So it's not going into the food chain for humans directly.
Well, unless if they don't eat those animals back.
Yeah, somebody is going to eat those animals, that's clear. But that stays mainly within Spain and the Spanish. That's what they do and have decided to do. But the rest of Europe is not producing GMOs. But what they do, though, is they're importing the GM feed from Brazil, Argentina, the North America, etc. That's been in contentious issues all along, but we're not producing it in our soil. So that was a big thing. We're not using it in the soil. We're not contaminating our seed stocks with it, etc. That was a big concern in Europe. But we're moving, as you said, rightly so, stimulated, I think triggered by and shaped to a certain extent by the debate about GMOs, which was more techno-centered debate. In the early 2000s, we started to see a bit of a shift in that discussion towards contextualizing technologies such as GMOs in larger system questions. Because it became clear we have climate change, biodiversity loss of fresh water, etc., etc. We had all the contamination issues where I said something is fundamentally wrong with the way we're producing our foods and we're treating our environment. So we have to change. And that's when then the discussion about agroecology, what are there alternative forms and different forms of agriculture? Clearly, agroecology is a concept that lends itself as, you know, is ready to go, basically. And so, and for that production system, GMOs have nothing to offer so far. There's because there are the ones we're dealing with right now. Two types, really. I mean, they make up 99% of the entire market of commercial GMOs are two types. And both are dealing with protecting yields or plant protection measures. One, the largest by far, is the use. It allows the use of broad spectrum herbicides to kill everything that's green other than your crop, so you can keep the weeds out of your field. You can apply it on a standing crop, without killing your crop. That's
Okay.
the idea.
Okay.
A broad spectrum herbicide would kill the crop as well if it weren't resistant to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so they made those crops resistant to those herbicides. That's the package I was speaking about. You provide the seeds and you provide the chemicals. So that was a brilliant business model. But this doesn't, it requires, so the benefit in this system comes from applying the herbicide, not the GMO. So the herbicide is doing the trick in that system.
Okay.
And the other one is an inbuilt insecticide. So instead of applying an insecticide externally, the plant produces an insecticide internally because you engineered it into the genes, into the seeds. And that has a whole range, of course, of unwanted side effects because you have that insecticide everywhere in the plant. You have it also in the food, and you have it in the plant all the time. It kills or is targeted against certain insects, but not all. And if you have other kinds of pest problems, you will still have to use insecticides on top of the insecticide that is expressed in the plant. These are the two types we have. None of them, so they're all pesticide-based. That's exactly what you want to get away with agroecology.
Yeah.
So this has nothing to offer for an agroecological system.
Okay.
And other than that, there has nothing really made the market to this date that goes beyond the remaining 1%. Shared by a number of different GMOs. So they're niche products at best. And that's what makes it really tricky. So you could debate if there would come up products that might offer something for an agroecological system that you would think about it. But that just hasn't happened because the mindset of those who develop it are geared towards a different production system.
Absolutely. And, well, saying that, one of the arguments that is out in the air is the fact that, the GMO, the improved seeds, are either done to either resist drought, as you mentioned, resist some kind of pests, herbicides,
or pests.
So that you can have a bumper harvest, which is anticipated to meet the increasing population. It is anticipated come 2050, the global population would have doubled. So it cascaded down to Africa and to Tanzania. We had 55 million, so we're looking on to 1 billion come 2050. So that. Yeah,
that narrative is one that came right from the get-go. You keep hearing that. Our population has already doubled and tripled since, well, when I was born.
Yeah.
Which is a while ago. And it pitches the narrative along productivity parameters and criteria. Productivity has not been a problem. We are producing more than enough calories, okay, to feed everybody. Yet we're not feeding everybody, okay? So clearly, and that could be increasing, that's not been the problem. The problem of feeding everybody was that, as we just discussed earlier, most of those production calories or produced calories didn't go into the human food chain. They went into the animal food chain and into the industrial chain. And so in essence, you've been the calories, it takes a multi-fold of the calories to produce a kilogram of meat than you could feed people with. If you took that grain and you would produce food out of it for humans directly, you could feed tenfold of the people, So that meat consumption notion that you have to crank up meat consumption is killing the planet. So that's not a path we can pursue anymore. So we have to shift, and if you would shift to a more plant-based diet, which is a more healthy diet on top of it, producing the calories is not the problem, never has been a problem and will not be the problem. It's the lifestyles, what you do with those calories, and what are you growing. I mean, we're growing maize, soybean, wheat, and rice.
Yeah.
And with all the maize and the soybean, humans don't eat that maize and soybean. Here in this country, yes, in Africa you eat a lot of maize, but we're talking about a different kind of maize that they're growing in Latin America. That's not what goes on your plate. That's what goes into an animal stomach, right?
Yes.
So that's not calories for humans. That's just calories for all kinds of purposes, but not necessarily humans. Humans are among them, but they're just one end user of it, of many end users, you know? But if we geared our production systems more towards actually the goal of feeding humans with healthy food, the productivity is not the limiting factor at all.
Okay.
Plus, these GMOs have not been bred for increasing yield. They've been bred for and designed for protecting the yield potential that came from conventional breeding.
Okay.
Okay, because it's a plant protection measure. Plant protection measures are not per se increasing yields.
Okay.
They're protecting the yield that your cultivar can potentially deliver.
Okay.
But the potential, of a yield potential of a cultivar is achieved through conventional breeding.
Okay.
If you haven't bred a high-yielding trait into it or increased, the herbicide is not going to trigger that, right? Herbicide is a plant protection. It's the herbicide that, for most of the GM plants, delivers the benefit. That just protects you from weeds competing with your crop, but doesn't increase the crop yield potential.
Okay.
And the same is with the insecticide producing one. It's just protecting the yield potential of your variety so that insects are not taking its share out of it, but it's not increasing the yield potential of that cultivar.
Okay.
That's come from conventional breeding.
And so consequently, if your soils are bad, you'll have low yields or no yields at all.
Yes.
So not necessarily that you use GMO seeds,
exactly.
so you're guaranteed to get that harvest.
Exactly.
You are watching the Monday Agenda, and I'm honored this evening to talk to Dr. Hilberg. And we're looking onto the sciences and the technology and the innovation put into the seeds for what is claimed or said to be a bumper harvest to meet the increasing population of the world come generations to come. So, innovation, science, technology, industrialization, you name it, into the seed industry. Is it bad? Is innovation bad? The scientists have sat down and cracked their heads, their brains, and came up with, let's engineer a seed that can, resist drought, that can resist pests, etc., so that the farmers can actually still be able to get the crops. Although, there are other factors that go along with that. So innovation, science, technology into agriculture.
I am a scientist,
yes.
So that's my bread and butter. That's what I do.
That's
what I love, and that's what I believe in, obviously. But all of this has to be contextualized. Again, there is not the science that exists outside of any context, and you just pick your fruits and it will out of itself deliver an end benefit. It depends what you use the science for, and it depends how you define innovation. So the industrial model from the last century, actually from the mid-last century, it started round about, with World War II, essentially, when the chemicals were developed, and you saw chemicals as an innovation and a technology that could be used once they've used it for the war, and after the war they used it for civil purposes. And used, the nitrogen they were using for building bombs before, they were using then for nitrogen fertilizers, for agriculture, etc. So that was innovation in those days, okay? Let's crank up the production. Everybody was hungry after destroying destructive war. We need to crank up our production, and we learned that putting a lot of artificial nitrogen in the soil would just give you this increase in production. But in those days, you weren't looking what it does to the soils in the long run. So we were missing that long-term perspective on what will it do to our environment, to our ecosystem processes, if we just crank in a lot of nitrogen or other fertilizers and extract everything from the soil without replenishing the soil fertility. So we lost sight of that. So that went well for a while, but then, the side effects kicked in. Same happened with the pesticides. We sprayed a lot of pesticides. Oh, we kill all the pests. Not understanding that every living being has a role out there. Also in an agroecosystem, it has a role. You have to tolerate a certain number of insects or of other critters that feed also on your crop in order to keep the checks and balances. And if you are producing with natural processes or aligned with natural processes, you don't need chemicals because the checks and balances will be there to protect your crops. But if you spray poisons, you poison good and bad equally.
Yeah.
And then those checks and balances are gone. And then you are on a treadmill because you have to spray more and more and more because your pests are getting resistant to it. So we learned all these lessons in the past 50, 60, 70 years by now. So that model of the 20th century is coming to an end.
Okay.
It's clearly everywhere where you did this extensively, like in Europe, you're seeing the end coming. So we really need to move away from that. And here comes innovation. So innovation is now embracing the ecological processes, understanding that we need to produce our food within this frame and not against it, which was the model of the last century. So for me, innovation is moving towards an ecologically smart system that doesn't ruin the processes that we need, the ecological processes, but actually manages in a very clever way to use them for our purposes, to help us produce healthy food and not kill it, not fight against it, work with it. That's, to me, innovation. And in that system, you can develop all the science and all the technology you want. That's fine with me, but it has to be repurposed for what system? And we tended in the past century, we tended to look at technology as a savior in and of itself. And we learned the hard way that's not how it works. We have to embed the technologies into larger goals. Where do we want to go? What do we want to have? What agro-food system? And then repurpose the technologies and shape them for that production system.
All right.
So that's where the discussions are also in Europe. Really.
Interesting, and we're going to have, I'm sure, a lot of these discussions on Monday.
We will, hopefully.
The 23rd. Before we get to the dialogue on Monday, the 23rd, I wish again to pick from you, Dr. Hilbeck, what is it of relevance now, today, to discuss agroecology in parallel with GMO in Tanzanian context, in African context, and probably the global context?
Yes, ideally, actually, I would like to see it discussed in this contextualized form in the global context. And I must really congratulate you that you have this kind of a conference. This is, to me, very innovative, very progressive, because in Europe, we still tend to have kind of the technology, people discussing amongst themselves the technologies, and within the agro-food system and transformation agenda, as we call it, we're discussing in different circles. So we really need to bring them together and contextualize technology and progress and innovation within a agro-food context that where we want to go with our food system. And that's really what I'm hoping is going to happen next week. And this is one of the very few conferences with standing where you bring in people from international universities to discuss that. That's quite innovative, and I'm hoping we will have a fruitful discussion on how to bring these together next week. There's a lot because Tanzania, maybe my last thing to say, you haven't done the mistakes we've done yet.
Okay, all right, okay. That's why one of the questions that I asked you earlier, what are some of the lessons that Tanzania can draw? Yeah.
So if you ask me, but if you have a company representative sitting here, will tell you something else. But if you ask me,
I want to really tap onto your 30 years of experience.
In this field. Skip the chemical era.
Okay.
Just move right into the agroecological era. You don't need to go through all of the destruction of the environment, the human health problems and all of that we had to go through to learn our lessons, to now come to the point where we're like, we have to change our agro-food system. You can wire your agro-food system and design it right now from the get-go to become productive, innovative, and ecological. And for that, you need to be very selective what kind of technology tools will help you to achieve that end, and not how the technology tools will be in and of themselves the drivers. They have to support you for your system goals. That would be my consulting.
But probably before we even leave our audience wondering what this agroecology is, maybe spend a minute or two saying what agroecology is, and is it an alternative to GMO? I get a lot of that question several times.
Yes.
Is it an alternative
Well,
to...
it's a bit comparing apples and pears, huh?
Okay.
So GMOs are a molecular tool. I mean, you create genetically modified organisms. In our case, it's usually plants, by tweaking the genes of seeds in the petri dish with molecular tools, okay? So that's a very technocratic approach to life. It's a very reductionistic approach to life, okay, where you perceive living organisms as being wired, like coded for by genes. That's a whole debate we need to have, we cannot have now, but that's a very controversial way of looking at organisms as well, just as a sum of its genes. That's not what we are, that's not what life is, okay? But that's what happens there. So it's molecular tools in a petri dish, you tweak genes, and then that's it. That has not really worked well, okay? Agroecology is of course, it's not one single technology, it's not one uniform way of doing things like the industrial model was.
Okay.
It's called, and the way it's framed is, it's a holistic approach to the entire agro-food system. It does not only include practices, it includes social means, cultural aspects, ethical aspects, economic aspects, marketing, etc. The whole system you want to shape and tailor to your local conditions and your local goals. Our goals in Europe are clearly different. We're trying to heal a destroyed environment now. We're trying to get biodiversity back. We're trying to get soil fertility back. That's what we're trying to do. You have here still much of it intact. You still have a flourishing diversity here. So your goals and your systems will be, you're in the tropics, we're in the temperate regions, so you will have very different packages. You have a smallholder basis. We have a few large producers, So it requires different solutions and different packages from each of these fields, but you must consider each of these fields. Not just focus on the production, but focus on what will it do your farmer basis. Do you want to abandon all the farm? Do you want to get rid of 80% of your farmers and just have 1% left? What do you do with the remaining 80-something%? Mm-hmm. Do you have a perspective for them, what they can do, or do you just put them out of work? And then what? We see this a lot where big plantation farming moves into third world countries. A lot of people get displaced. They move to the urban quarters that are not very, very nice and conducive for good life. And there's maybe a tenth of the workforce that used to work on the land is still then producing commodities, raw materials that go for export, or stuff like that. Is that a model you want to embrace here in Tanzania without having a plan for what you do with your smallholders? Or do you want to empower your smallholders and enable them to feed themselves and you here? And then you need a different model for that.
Okay.
So I'm not the one who will tell you that. Yeah. You will need to train your people to help you design what fits best in your system. That's what we all have to do, and we have to redesign our system to become more ecological.
With close to 3 minutes left to the end of the program, Dr. Hillberg, do you have anything to say about the dialogue, the open dialogue next week, Monday?
Other than hoping that it will be an open dialogue,
yes,
and that we will be engaging in a discussion that I find, as I said, unique to have, bringing the sides together in one room and discussing food production. That's my hope, and I'm very happy to be very honored that I can be part of this in this country. It's not a foregone conclusion that you would invite somebody like me to a debate like that. So I feel very honored to be here and hope I can be of use.
It's truly a privilege. So for you and me, this open dialogue at the University of Dar es Salaam on the 23rd of November is basically to help a farmer. It's basically to inform a farmer of the choices and the consequences of the choices that they have to make should they choose to go conventional or non-conventional into agriculture. We are very considerate of the fact that we are into, our economy is mainly agricultural economy and the backbone of our country, and that is why this platform has been put for you to come, learn, and make informed choices. The Monday agenda will have, unless Dr. Hillberg, if you have anything else to tell the Tanzanians, and then that's...
Fine. I wish you good luck.
Thank you so very much. And there's so much we can continue to discuss, but in the interest of time, I really must say thank you very much for coming into the program. It's really been a very informative program, and we look forward to the discussions, to the dialogue on Monday, the 23rd, at the University of Dar es Salaam, the new library hall, where different schools of thoughts will come together and discuss the seeds and biodiversity in Tanzania. With that, I would like to say thank you so much for watching, and thank you for coming to the program once again. I'm your host, Austin Makani. Until next time, thank you for watching the Monday Agenda.